The worst part wasn't what she said. It was how easily everyone agreed. "Maybe you should find another table," my mother said softly, adjusting her pearl bracelet as if she had just suggested moving a chair. "This one's for immediate family." The laughter wasn't loud. It was worse than that. It was polite, controlled, agreeable. 24 years in that house. 24 birthdays. 24 Christmas mornings. And somehow I still needed permission to sit at the table. I looked around the room. My father avoided my eyes. My brother Daniel smirked into his wine glass. My aunt whispered something behind her napkin. Not one person said, "She belongs here." So I smiled, because for the first time in my life I understood something they didn't. They thought I needed their table. They had no idea I was about to own the house it sat in. My name is Annabelle Carter, and this is the night my family learned the difference between adoption and ownership. I was adopted when I was 8 months old. At least that's what the official story says. Growing up, my mother loved reminding me that I was chosen. But the word never sounded warm. It sounded like a transaction. "We saved you," she would say whenever I disagreed with her. Saved. As if I had been drowning. As if gratitude meant silence. My father wasn't cruel. He was distant. There's a difference. Cruelty burns. Distance freezes. Daniel, my older brother, was the golden child. Athletic. Loud. Effortlessly confident. I was quiet. Observant. Careful. At family gatherings, introductions always followed the same pattern. "This is Daniel, our son. And this is Annabelle. She's adopted." That word followed me everywhere. Adopted. Not daughter. Not sister. Just adopted. When I was 15, I found out something that changed how I saw everything. I overheard my parents arguing in the study. "She doesn't need to know," my father said. "She will find out eventually," my mother replied. "Not if we control the narrative." Narrative. They weren't talking about feelings. They were talking about image. That night I realized something important. I wasn't just adopted. I was managed. Despite everything, I tried to earn my place. I graduated with honors. I earned a scholarship to study finance. I worked part-time internships while Daniel switched majors 3 times and still received monthly support from my parents. Every achievement of mine was met with polite applause. Daniel's smallest effort was celebrated like a miracle. When I landed a junior analyst position at a respected investment firm, my father's response was simple. "That's good. Stability matters." When Daniel announced he wanted to explore entrepreneurial opportunities, my mother nearly cried with pride. I stopped chasing validation after that. Instead, I started building something quietly. I invested carefully. I studied the family's business operations. My grandfather had founded Carter Holdings decades ago. And while my father officially ran it, I noticed inefficiencies, risky decisions, emotional investments instead of strategic ones. But no one asked for my opinion. I was adopted, temporary, replaceable. Then came Grandma Evelyn's birthday dinner. 79 years old. Sharp mind. Softer heart than she ever showed publicly. She was the only one who treated me like I belonged without conditions. When I was younger, she used to tell me, "Blood builds bodies. Loyalty builds families." I didn't fully understand it then. I did that night. The dining room glittered with crystal glasses and gold-edged plates. My mother had invited half of her social circle. Appearances mattered more than intimacy. I arrived early, helping staff set the table. Old habits. Guests began arriving. Daniel entered last, fashionably late, confident as ever. And then my mother said it. Maybe you should find another table. This one's for immediate family. She didn't shout. She didn't whisper. She said it like a fact. Immediate family. As if I had been on loan for 2 decades. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me, waiting to see if I would protest, to see if I would shrink. Instead, I pulled out a chair. And before I could sit, Grandma Evelyn spoke. Annabelle stays. Her voice cut through the room like glass. My mother forced a smile. Mother, it was just seating arrangements. Grandma's gaze didn't move. No, it wasn't. She turned to me. Sit beside me. I did. And something in the air changed. Dinner continued with forced laughter. Daniel made jokes about business trends he barely understood. My father discussed expansion plans for Carter Holdings. I listened quietly. When Daniel suggested a risky acquisition, I finally spoke. That company has outstanding litigation exposure, I said calmly. It would be a liability within 2 years. Silence. Daniel scoffed. Since when are you the expert? Since I analyzed their public filings, I replied. My father frowned. We're handling it. Grandma watched closely. Very closely. Halfway through dessert, she stood. The room immediately quieted. I've lived long enough to recognize patterns, she began. And I've watched one repeat itself in this house. My mother stiffened. Grandma continued. One child is praised for potential. Another is punished for competence. My heart pounded. My father shifted uncomfortably. Mother, this isn't necessary. It is, she replied firmly. She nodded toward the hallway. A man stepped forward carrying a leather briefcase. Our family attorney. I hadn't known he would be there. The air felt heavy. The attorney cleared his throat. As per Mrs. Evelyn Carter's updated estate directive. Updated. My mother's fingers tightened around her napkin. Primary oversight authority of Carter Holdings, including voting shares held in trust, will transfer effective immediately upon my client's written confirmation. The room froze. Daniel laughed nervously. And that confirmation would go to Dad, obviously. The attorney looked up. No. He turned to me. To Miss Annabelle Carter. The silence this time wasn't polite. It was explosive. My father stood. That's impossible. It is legally binding, the attorney replied calmly. Grandma's eyes met mine. I will not leave my legacy to arrogance, she said quietly. I will leave it to discipline. My mother's voice trembled. She isn't even. Grandma cut her off. Finish that sentence. But she couldn't, because the truth was about to surface. And none of them were ready for it. No one moved. No one breathed. My mother was the first to recover. This is ridiculous, she said sharply. You cannot hand a multigenerational company to someone who isn't even your blood. The sentence hung in the air. Isn't even your blood. Grandma Evelyn didn't blink. Be very careful, she said softly. My father stepped forward. Mother, this is emotional decision-making. Annabelle is. What? Grandma pressed. Adopted. Silence. Yes, my father said finally. She is adopted. The word was thrown like a verdict. And for a moment I felt that familiar sting. But it didn't last. Because Grandma wasn't finished. You are correct, she said calmly. Annabelle was adopted. My mother exhaled in relief. Daniel leaned back smugly. Then Grandma added, "But not in the way you've told everyone." The room shifted again. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The attorney opened another folder from his briefcase. "5 years ago," he began, "Mrs. Carter privately requested access to sealed family records." My mother's face drained of color. My father's hand tightened around his glass. Grandma looked at me gently. "There is something you were never meant to know," she said. My throat felt dry. "Annabelle," she continued, "your adoption was not the result of abandonment." My breath caught. The attorney continued reading. "You were placed in the Carter household under a confidential family arrangement following the financial collapse of your birth mother." Birth mother. The words felt unreal. Grandma's voice softened. "Your birth mother was my youngest daughter." The world stopped. My chair felt unsteady beneath me. "That's not true," my mother whispered harshly. "That agreement was sealed." "Yes," Grandma replied. "Sealed to protect reputation." Reputation. So that's what I had been. A solution. A cover. Not a rescue. Not a blessing. A strategic decision. I looked at my father. "You knew." He didn't answer. That silence was enough. Daniel shook his head. "So what?" "That doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," Grandma said firmly. She turned to me. "You were never an outsider. You were hidden." The words hit harder than any insult ever had. Hidden. For 24 years, I had been treated like a guest in my own bloodline. And they had known. My mother's voice cracked. "We did what was necessary." "For who?" I asked quietly. "For this family," she snapped. I stood slowly. "No," I said. "You did what was convenient." The room felt electric. Guests looked horrified. Some embarrassed. Others fascinated. My father tried to regain control. "This changes nothing about the company." "Oh, it changes a great deal," the attorney said calmly. He slid documents across the table. "Ms. Annabelle Carter has been designated controlling beneficiary of the trust structure tied to Mrs. Carter's shares." Daniel laughed again, but it sounded forced. "You can't seriously think she'll run it better than Dad." I met his eyes evenly. "I won't think," I said. "I'll analyze." That shut him up. Grandma spoke again. "I have watched you gamble with expansion projects. I have watched you dismiss risk reports. I have watched arrogance replace discipline." She looked at my father. "And I have watched you ignore the only person at this table who studied the numbers before speaking." The truth was uncomfortable, but it was accurate. For years I had quietly reviewed public filings, modeled scenarios, studied debt structures, not because I expected control, but because I refused to remain ignorant. My mother tried one last angle. "She owes this family gratitude." I turned to her slowly. "Gratitude for what?" "For raising you." I nodded once. "I was grateful," I said calmly, "until gratitude was weaponized." The room went silent again. Grandma reached for my hand. "You were never meant to feel temporary," she said softly. "But I did," I replied. And that was the real damage. The following days were chaos. Board members requested emergency meetings. News of the shift spread faster than expected. Carter Holdings wasn't just a family name. It was a public entity with influence. And suddenly, the adopted daughter was its controlling voice. The first board meeting was tense. Men who had known me since childhood looked skeptical. One cleared his throat. "With respect, this is sudden." "Yes," I replied calmly. It is. I projected financial summaries onto the screen. Which is why we're going to begin with risk exposure in the Southeast acquisition. Faces shifted, because I knew the numbers. Better than they expected. Better than Daniel ever had. By the end of the meeting, skepticism had softened into reluctant respect. Not because of inheritance, but because of competence. At home things were different. Cold. My mother avoided me. My father remained distant. Daniel oscillated between anger and forced friendliness. One evening he cornered me in the hallway. "You think this makes you better than us?" he asked. "No," I said simply. "It makes me responsible." He scoffed. "You always wanted this." I shook my head. "I wanted a seat at the table," I said quietly. "Not the entire house." He had no response to that. Weeks later I visited Grandma alone. Her health had declined slightly, but her mind remained sharp. "Are you angry?" she asked me. I considered the question. "Yes," I admitted. "But not at you." She nodded. "They were afraid," she said. "Of what?" "That the truth would disrupt control." It had. And control was the one thing my parents valued more than affection. "I don't want revenge," I told her. "Good," she replied. "Because revenge consumes. Boundaries protect." That distinction mattered. So I made a decision. At the next family dinner I arrived early again. But this time I chose the head of the table. No one told me to move. No one told me to find another seat. They simply watched. And for the first time in 24 years I didn't feel like I was borrowing space. I felt like I belonged. Not because they allowed it, but because it was always mine. Grandma Evelyn passed away 3 months later. Peacefully. Without regret. The night after her memorial, we gathered once again in the same dining room where everything had changed. The same chandelier. The same polished table. But nothing felt the same. This time no one told me to move. Halfway through dinner my mother finally spoke. "I never meant for you to feel unwanted," she said quietly. I looked at her for a long moment. "Intent doesn't erase impact," I replied. She nodded slowly, as if she was hearing that truth for the first time. My father cleared his throat. "We made decisions based on what we thought protected the family." I held his gaze. "You protected the image," I said calmly. "Not the people." The words weren't cruel. They were honest. Daniel shifted in his chair. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said. "Now we start acting like adults. No more secrets. No more hierarchy based on ego." "And if we don't?" he challenged. I leaned back slightly. "Then I build my life without the need for your approval." Silence followed. Not hostile. Just reflective. Because for the first time I wasn't asking to belong. I was choosing whether I wanted to. Over the next year, Carter Holdings stabilized. Risky expansions were paused. Debt was reduced. The company regained credibility in the market. Not because I was extraordinary, but because I was disciplined. At home things changed slowly. Not perfectly, but honestly. My mother stopped introducing me as our adopted daughter. She started saying, "This is my daughter, Annabelle." It was a small shift, but it mattered. I no longer felt like a temporary chapter in someone else's story. I felt permanent. And the most powerful realization of all? I never needed their validation to have value. The night she told me to find another table, I did. I stopped fighting for space in rooms that treated me like an afterthought. I stopped shrinking to keep peace. And I started building a life where respect was not conditional. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong, if you've ever been treated as less than because of something beyond your control, remember this. You do not beg for a seat. You build your own table. And the right people will sit there willingly. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been treated differently in your own family? Have you ever felt like you had to earn love that should have been unconditional? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more powerful family stories that remind you of your strength. I'll see you in the next one.